Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Being Patient Brain Talks. I'm Deborah Kahn, founder of Being Patient. Welcome to our community. We are holding talks on the latest news around brain health and Alzheimer's disease. Today, we are going to talk about Aducanumab. A lot of you know about this drug. It's a Biogen Eisai drug that is currently awaiting approval from the FDA. Long history behind this drug, but we thought we would bring on one of the principal investigators. Joining me now is Dr. Stephen Salloway from Butler Hospital. He is a principal investigator for Adukanumab. Welcome, Dr. Salloway.
Thanks so much.
Okay, so this drug was off to a rocky start. Just for people who may not know the full story, it was under phase 3 clinical trial when Biogen decided to pull it because of the data, saying that they didn't have the data that they thought supported the continuation of this trial. Then they got a new set of data which pointed towards validity to continuing the trial, invited the people who were already on the trial back after an almost 1-year hiatus. Now the company is applying for approval from the FDA, and that's where we're at. Am I correct, Dr. Salloway? Is that the right?
Yeah, I mean, the drug is a interesting approach for treating Alzheimer's. It gets into the brain at very low concentrations, and it binds to the amyloid plaques that build up in Alzheimer's, and then it stimulates the immune system to help break up the plaques and remove them. And it looks like it does this pretty well, that it does lower the plaque buildup. And it actually got off to a really good start in the early phase trial, which showed that there was a slowing down of cognitive decline in the first study. And then, as you said, in the larger phase 3 program, to reproduce that result, Biogen did an interim analysis a year prior to the end of the study, when everybody had already been enrolled, when half of them had finished. And they found that the drug probably wasn't going to meet its primary outcome, and they decided to terminate the trial early. And then they looked at all the data that they had for everybody after that, and they found that in at least one of the studies, there were 2 trials, it looked like it was working.
Okay, so now, I mean, you're one of the principal investigators, so you've kind of been through the different phases. What types of results are you seeing, or can you give us any insights into how
Sure.
This trial is going?
Well, I've had a lot of experience with this drug. I've been involved with the development of it right from the beginning in people, and I probably have treated the most people in the world, I might say, on this drug. And because the first trial lasted for a year against placebo, and then everyone who would continue on active medicine. So we've had many people at our center who've been on Aducanumab for more than 5 years and on active treatment. So I really had a lot of experience with it. And the news is that the majority of people that were on it actually stayed pretty stable over a pretty long period of time, which is not typical for Alzheimer's, because Alzheimer's gets gradually worse. And these people were holding their own, at least, the majority of them, better than expected. So preserving quality of life in early stages of Alzheimer's is worth a lot. And families who at least had this stability really appreciated it.
So we should be really clear on this. This is not meant to, I mean, if you are in full-blown Alzheimer's at maybe medium to later stage, is this meant for you? It's really aimed at the MCI and earlier Alzheimer's, is that right?
Yeah, we'll wait to hear what the FDA says, but the trial was geared for people with early Alzheimer's, so what we call mild cognitive impairment, so early memory loss, but still functioning well, or mild dementia, where even though there's a little more difficulty day to day, people were still pretty independent. So it's for an earlier stage of Alzheimer's. I don't know what the FDA will say about later stages, but we really never tested it for those stages.
Okay, and then there was a little bit of a hiccup recently with the FDA saying, they're asking for more data. They're saying they're not sure about the efficacy. Tell us a little bit about the most recent development.
Well, the FDA held an advisory panel in November to review this application from Biogen. And the FDA clinical staff looked at the data very carefully and worked with Biogen, and they felt that they gave it a positive review. They thought that there was benefit and the drug was certainly worth considering. Then they had a group of outside experts review the data. And, because of as you described it, the data, was a little bit complicated. The trial ended early. We increased the dose, and the dose is important during the trial. So not everybody got to the highest dose. So there were a number of issues with the data, and they look, it's like glass half full, glass half empty. There are investigators like myself who've had a lot of experience view this as beneficial to people and, the opening of a new era for the treatment of Alzheimer's. But you can also look at it the other way and say, geez, I'm not sure if the data is strong enough. Maybe we should wait and do more research. Maybe it works, but they weren't sure.
Is there any indication about the timing of the FDA approval or answer, I should say?
They have a date. They have a deadline that it was initially going to be March 7th, but then they postponed it for 3 months. So the new date to give their decision is June 7th, which is 3 weeks away. So we're eagerly awaiting.
So I'm sure a lot of people are eagerly awaiting.
Absolutely. I think a lot of families with Alzheimer's are eagerly awaiting.
So let's go back a little bit and talk about this approach, because as we know,
Sure.
there's many different roads now being taken. And I mean, technically, Aducanumab is an immunotherapy. Is that correct to say?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So
it's an immune-based treatment. It's like a vaccine type of treatment.
So what we're actually doing when we take this drug, or those who are taking it, is that they are utilizing a part of their immune system to get rid of the plaque, beta amyloid plaque in the brain. Is that correct?
Well, it's interesting how this drug was developed because it's a little bit different from some of the other antibodies. Right now, you hear on TV a lot of medicines advertised with MAB at the end, MAB. And that stands for monoclonal antibodies. So that's the immune piece that you're talking about. And what happened with Adukanymab is that the company that was developing it before Biogen looked at older people who lived a long life and either didn't get Alzheimer's or had a very slow form. Something was keeping them from getting a bad form of Alzheimer's. And then they surveyed these people and looked for antibodies that might be retarding that Alzheimer process in the brain. And the lead drug they found was Aducanumab. So this is actually a human antibody that has now been manufactured and is it's given by infusion, and it binds to the plaques and it helps break them up and clear them.
So this treatment would be available to, if it's passed, under the current trials. It's really aimed for people in a very early stage, but who test positive for vis-a-vis a PET scan or a spinal tap
Right.
for beta amyloid plaque, right?
Right. So the way we structured the trial is that people had early Alzheimer's, pardon me, either, as I said, mild cognitive impairment or mild dementia, and they had an amyloid test. Primarily in this study, we used a PET scan, a brain scan, to make sure they were building up plaques. And we only treated the people that were building up plaques. You can also get the same information by looking in the spinal fluid for change in amyloid. We didn't really do that primarily in the study, but I think if it's approved, the FDA will likely allow both ways to test for amyloid buildup.
Okay, now here's the tricky part. If it does get approved, we know that most people don't get PET scans or lumbar punctures because they cost a ton of money and they're not covered by insurance in most cases. I think I know people who get them often go into clinical trials, and will get them because they're participating in a trial, but it's not part of our checkups. We wouldn't go to a doctor and say, hey, I want a PET scan, when they cost about $7,000, or north of 5,000 to get one. So
Right.
what does this mean to the average person? How do they prove that they have plaque in order to qualify or how do doctors determine this? I mean, they're not going to,
Right.
who's going to absorb that cost?
Well, this is a great question, and thank you for asking it. So there will need to be, well, I don't know what the FDA is going to say, but I strongly suspect that there will need to be an amyloid test. In many cases, the spinal fluid test is covered by Medicare and some other providers. So it may be where we start out looking in spinal fluid because of the coverage, and the cost is lower for the spinal fluid test than the brain scan. Most people in the US prefer the brain scan because they're a little frightened of spinal taps. I mean, I've done thousands of spinal taps. It's not a big procedure, but a lot of people are nervous about it. In Europe, when someone in a memory clinic, almost everyone will have a spinal tap and will have this test. So it just depends, the community you're in terms of uptake of this, what the practice is. I hope that Medicare, I know there's a lot of discussions underway with Medicare right now to cover the amyloid PET scan as well. We're really going to need that. And so if it's not immediately after the approval, hopefully soon after, there will be a parallel approval for the PET scan, because we really need the amyloid testing. And then,
what about, the blood tests are coming, maybe. I mean,
yeah,
they're not.
You took the word right out of my mouth.
Okay, sorry.
Well, I think the solution here, we do need to do amyloid testing, because we don't want to treat people with this drug right now that aren't building up the plaques. And so the solution here is a blood test. It's going to be way cheaper and much more widely available, and any doctor is going to be able to order it and so forth. We're really pretty close. I'm really excited about it. We're right on the verge. We're using them now for research to screen for trials. And I think we got to get them into the clinic as quickly as we can validate them. So my message to the powers that be, and I want to be part of that solution, is that let's get those blood tests ready for clinical use.
Okay, so let's, for those people who are watching who may not know as much as we do about the pathology of this disease. The presumed pathology is you start with the beta amyloid plaques and then later get the tau tangles, and then the third part is an inflammatory state, right? When you reach that inflammatory state, that's usually when you're seeing symptoms of Alzheimer's disease.
Well, the real problem is the degeneration of nerve cells and the breakdown of the connections between one nerve cell and another, the synapses. That's what causes the memory loss. It starts, as you say, typically with the amyloid buildup in between the nerve cells. That creates a toxic environment that causes the tau, clumps of tau, to build up inside nerve cells. Both of these stimulate the immune system, and sometimes they overreact to try to clear this debris in the brain. But then what happens is that the nerve cells start to break down. And that's where the memory loss and the decline in daily functioning happens. So I think, like any major disease, this is a major disease, of course, we got to get in there early and try to stop that whole process as soon as we can. So right now, if we get an approval, the goal will be to focus on shutting down amyloid in this early stage of Alzheimer's. We're testing drugs like Aducanumab and others even earlier for people who have no memory loss at all, but are building up plaques, or even just starting to build up plaques. Let's try to shut down that whole disease process and keep all those other stages from evolving. And that's what really leads to the disability of Alzheimer's. So prevention is the ultimate goal, but this is an important first step to get us started and something that we can build on. I mean, my goal is to really open the modern era for the treatment of Alzheimer's. And what that means is we treat Alzheimer's like any other major disease, like heart disease or cancer. We want to catch it early. We want to try to prevent it. We want to slow it down. We need tests like blood tests or other scans to diagnose it accurately. to monitor it. And we need treatments like Aducanumab, like treatments that focus on tau or inflammation or so many other targets to slow this. It's not going to be one drug that treats Alzheimer's. It's going to require combination treatment, and it needs to be personalized. Everyone has a little bit different form of Alzheimer's. And so we need to tailor the treatment for the individual. And one thing I think your listeners can take away is that we want to promote brain health. So as we age, we want to get to the finish line with our brain in pretty good shape, and our body too. And that means taking care of ourselves, taking care of good heart health, exercising, eating a healthy diet, keeping stimulated. All these things will promote brain health. And so that's really an important part of the equation here about how to keep Alzheimer's, further off in the distance.
Okay, and we have a question that's come in asking how long does it take before Adukanumab is working?
That's a great question. And I can tell you how the treatment is likely, how we did use the treatment in the trial and how we're likely to use it in practice. The medicine is given by infusion once a month. It takes a little, increasingly over time, the amyloid buildup is lowered. Everybody changes at a little bit different rate. We build up, and with this medicine, we build up gradually on the dose. There can be a side effect of fluid shifts in the brain when you remove the amyloid. We use MRI to monitor for that. Usually there are no symptoms with that, but we need to monitor for that. And it's dose related. And we try, if you go slowly and building up the medicine, it's less likely to happen, or it's likely to be less severe. So we need to build up on the dose. And then this gets into a question about monitoring. See, you mentioned that the PET scans are expensive. One way we could monitor is to look at the change on the PET scan. That's what we did in the trial. Right now, I'm not even sure if Medicare is going to pay for one PET scan, never mind 2 or 3 PET scans, over time to monitor for that. Again, I think the blood tests are going to be helpful here. But the main way, the answer to the question is that the most important thing to keep track of is how the person's doing. How's their memory day to day? How's their functioning day to day? Hopefully, they're relatively stable and they don't seem to be changing much over the first year or 2, or hopefully more, that they're on treatment. That would be a good sign.
So, and another, this is perfect timing for this question. Another viewer is asking, will you need to stay on Adukanumab for life?
Well, these are all great questions. We don't know the answer to that. We know that amyloid lowering does take place after a year and 18 months and so forth, and it continues up to a certain point. But we don't know how long someone really needs to get those monthly infusions. If they get to a point where they're considered amyloid negative, they don't look like they have Alzheimer's. If we on the PET scan, is that a good time to stop? And I know Lilly has been testing a similar drug called Donanemab, and there's the MAB again, and they had good results from a recent trial that showed lowering of amyloid and also a slowing down of memory loss. And they stopped once someone got to a normal range of amyloid, not considered below the cutoff for Alzheimer's, they stopped the medicine.
But maybe it will be a bit like cancer, where you have to get yearly checks or yearly scans to see if something's coming
I think
back.
that makes good sense. We just don't have enough data yet, but I think there's going to be an induction phase. It's like cancer, where you reduce the buildup. And then there could maybe be a maintenance phase where you could, wouldn't have to come every month for the medicine. You could come less frequently to keep that buildup from coming back. But we don't know the answer yet.
If a person has both plaque and tangles in their brain, is it too late to have a drug like Adukanumab?
Oh, that's another great question. So again, from the Adukanymab data, we don't know about that. We got some tau scans, but they were added later in the trial, so we didn't use it for inclusion criteria. But we did have some positive results in a small number of patients that lowering amyloid actually lowered tau buildup. on the people that got tau PET scans. So it looked like changing amyloid was helping change tau.
So can you get, I mean, do we know how long that process takes? Does it always have to start just with beta amyloid plaque and then evolves into tau tangles, or can you get both at the same time?
Well, of course, in medicine, anything can happen. So both things are right, but typically we have a lot of data about this now. There's amyloid buildup slowly over 10 to 15 or 20 years, and then the tau begins to build up. And it almost always follows that. And 95% or more of cases, that's the pattern.
So so presumably these MAB drugs wants to slow that whole process down, right? So you're catching people within that kind of 10 to 15.
I think the ideal time is to catch them really early, just as they're starting to build up the amyloid, especially if they're at higher risk. Shut it down.
Did you include, were the APOE4, the genetically predisposed folks in these studies?
Right. So yes, we tested everyone for APOE4, and it turns out in the Aducanumab program, 2/3 of them were carrying this risk gene for Alzheimer's and 1/3 did not. As far the data that I've seen, it looks like it works for both people, but the chance of having the fluid shifts is higher with the APOE4 carriers. That's a risk for these fluid shifts. So yeah, so I don't know what the FDA is going to say about this, but it's been our practice to test for APOE for all of our patients that go on Aducanumab or medicine like it.
So Dr. Salloway, what have been some of the side effects in the trials?
Well, for Aducanumab, the main one has been what's referred to as amyloid-related imaging abnormalities. What that means is that what we found that when you remove the amyloid from the brain, you also remove amyloid from blood vessels as well, especially in APOE4 carriers who carry this risk gene. And that can cause a little bit of leakiness in the blood vessels, especially early in treatment, usually in the first 6 months. And 70% of the time there are no symptoms, but there can be some mild symptoms. But we monitor for that. It shows up on an MRI scan. So at least during the first, again, we'll see what the FDA says, but at least during the first year, I think people should have safety MRI scans every 3 months to monitor for that. And then sometimes we have to adjust the medicine. It almost always goes away on its own. We wait for it to clear if it's above a certain level, and then it almost always goes away.
Okay, and another viewer is asking, how do we address the shortage of memory specialists if Adukanymab gets approved? So,
boy, I love every question.
We have a very educated audience, as you can tell.
No, it's a great question because this is critical to this particular treatment, but future treatments for Alzheimer's. Once we have blood tests and everything else, there aren't enough, memory specialists to take care of the millions of people in the United States, just focusing on our country, with Alzheimer's disease. So more people are going to have to get involved. And also, I think this is going to require a real community response if this drug is approved, because it's given by infusion. We're going to need infusion centers for Adukanumab. There are a lot of people that will be eligible. Millions of people will be eligible for the treatment. So we have to figure out how to give the medicine, how to monitor for its safely. People have to learn, radiologists, how to recognize this ARIA that I mentioned that shows up on MRI. So we need to bring more providers into the mix to make this happen. So I look forward to that. It's going to be a big challenge, but really important because Alzheimer's is such an important, I call Alzheimer's the epidemic within the pandemic. So we're focused on COVID, but underneath that is Alzheimer's is brewing, and it's major league.
But presumably you don't want every single, okay, let's say the FDA does approve Aducanumab. I could imagine it would be quite a disaster with everybody with an Alzheimer's diagnosis wants this drug, because if you're further down the pipeline, it's not the drug for you. Is that a fair statement?
Well, again, we don't have data in people that are more impaired, so I can't say anything about it. But
I mean, at this stage,
I think it makes less scientific sense. It makes less scientific sense that lowering amyloid in later stage Alzheimer's is going to be effective. I think that the chance of that alone is probably very, very low. So, but we're going to be guided by the label that the FDA will give us. And if with each person who is eligible, let's say not off-label use, that's what you're talking about. So if they say it's for mild cognitive impairment or mild dementia, what if someone has more advanced dementia and the family really wants it? And please, doctor, compassionate use and everything. And that's considered an off-label use. I'm more concerned, and I feel for those people, believe me. But I'm more concerned about the on-label use. And I think what the opportunity I hope we'll have is that a patient who meets the criteria could then talk with their provider and their family and discuss, about this additional treatment, this new treatment, is it right for them? And they can decide, and they can ask about the side effects just as you have, and what's the likely benefit, and weigh it out. Is this a good treatment for me? We'll have to look at reimbursement and coverage, and that's really critical.
And this is a great time to ask this question. Another viewer is asking, would getting a neurologist involved in this process help? Like, I guess, so basically, how would you get prescribed with Adukanymab? And is that a primary care physician could do it, or does it have to be a neurologist?
I envision that starting out, at least for the first years of treatment, this will be a specialty-based treatment, starting with memory specialists like myself or other centers. But then hopefully other neurologists, other geriatric specialists will take an interest in this and, get more involved as well. I don't see it as a primary care treatment right now. Maybe someday. I mean, anything's possible, but not starting out.
So I'm curious about the other mAbs. You mentioned the Lilly Donanemab that's also under clinical trial. What's the difference between those two medications? Is it the same process, just different branding, or what's the difference?
Okay, well, there are a number of monoclonal antibodies that target amyloid in development, and some of them have shown similar results to Aducanumab. So the most recent results were from Donanemab, is made by Lilly. It has a little bit different molecular structure, but it has the same effect of getting into the brain at low concentrations, binding to the plaques, helping to break them up, helping to clear them. And it has some encouraging data from the most recent phase 2 trial. So there are no head-to-head studies between these two. And there are two other ones that have also showed some positive results as well. One is developed by Eisai, the banned drug that you mentioned earlier. Another one is a Roche drug called Gantenerumab.
This is going to sound like a bit of a silly question, but when you say breaking the plaques down, what does that mean? Do they get reabsorbed into the bloodstream? Where do they go? So we have plaque in our brain. We're taking a drug that is targeting those plaques and breaking them up. Then where do they go?
Yeah, more than likely they're broken up by what's called microglia, these little immune cells.
Which only come out when we sleep.
Into smaller fragments and then cleared away by the bloodstream primarily.
Okay, so that also reinforces the fact that sleep is really important, right?
Well, sleep is good. There's a lot of things we can do to promote brain health. So sleep is one of them.
Okay, well, thank you.
There's less amyloid deposited during sleep, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much, Dr. Salloway, for your time to explain more about Aducanumab. We are eagerly, like everyone else, waiting for the results of the FDA.
Well, thanks so much for having me. And thanks for all the great questions. I just have another thing or two to say, if you don't mind,
sure,
about your questions. One is, I think what we need initially is a real partnership with primary care, because primary care needs to be involved in this process. They see the patients, and they need to diagnose people in the early stages and get them, the care that would help them the most. So that's really important. And then also predicting who's most likely to respond. And I think you mentioned about the tau buildup. I think that's going to be really helpful. We have tests. We have a brain scan for tau now. We have blood tests coming on for tau. And knowing what the status is of amyloid and tau might really help predict who's likely to benefit from treatment.
So, and then I mean, one viewer was asking about the blood tests. I mean, they're already available to physicians and for research, but what about to the consumer? Any predictions about how far away we are?
Oh, the home testing. Well, ApoE can be done. 23andMe offers ApoE testing.
What about for the plaques, the blood test for
Oh boy. Well, everything is going to consumers now. So that makes me so nervous though. Even ApoE, because people don't get counseling when they find out they're.
Yeah. Well, 23andMe gives you your ApoE for
I know, but they don't counsel you about it.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but they don't tell you what that means and what how to process it and all that kind of stuff. That's an important part of clinical care.
But what about
I envision down the road, Deborah, that we're going to be able to test people with a blood test and tell about where they are on the Alzheimer pathway and their risk way early, and have hopefully a number of approaches to delay the bad outcome related to Alzheimer's. So I think the future, there will be a lot of involvement with consumers. I mean, people who are concerned about their health as they age.
Right. Let me end on this note. Like, what's your biggest concern if the FDA does in fact approve Aducanumab? What's your biggest worry?
Biggest worry. I don't know that I have a biggest worry about one thing, but it's more, there's a lot of moving parts here. In Alzheimer's, we haven't had a new drug for 18 years, sadly, despite many, many trials. And we've never had an IV drug. And certainly the Alzheimer population is a pretty large population that might benefit. So just rolling it, just really providing wide access for people who might benefit. I think that's going to be a real challenge for us everywhere. I mean, because it's a big undertaking.
Yeah, and it's a big hope for people. So I imagine a lot of people will want to.
I think people are going to want. I think it's the beginning. I think it opens a door to a new treatment era. That's what I'm so excited about. And I hope we get a green light
yeah, we all hope so too, and we wish you all the best with the research. We'll wait for the decision in June, and then hopefully speak to you again about progress.
That'd be great.
Once
That'd be great.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much for covering this.
And to our community and our audience, don't forget to sign up for our newsletters on beingpatient.com, where you get we will tell you which talks are upcoming. Professionals like Dr. Salloway always join, which is wonderful to have this access. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch up with you next time.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.